I hadn't been home in over 10 years, and truthfully, I thought I never would be again. But when I got the call that my father had passed, I booked the first flight back to Virginia. It wasn't grief that pulled me across the country, it was confusion. A feeling in my gut I couldn't ignore. My older brother Brian had sent the text himself. Dad's gone. Funeral Saturday. You don't have to come. That's what caught me. Not, you should come. Not, we need you. Just the same dismissive tone he used the day I walked out. I arrived at the church 10 minutes early, stood at the back in a black suit that still felt like it belonged to someone else. Faces turned when I walked in. Some looked surprised. Others whispered. Brian didn't even nod. Just sat up front with that same smug expression he's had since birth. After the service, we gathered in the oak-paneled office of my father's longtime attorney, Kenneth Weller. He was the kind of man who looked like he'd been carved out of mahogany and old books. I remembered him from when I was a kid. He'd let me pick peppermints from the candy jar when Dad came in to handle business. There were about 12 of us crammed in cousins, aunts, a few people I didn't recognize. Brian had his hand on our mom's shoulder, steady and calculated. Then Weller opened the will. It was long, detailed, methodical. My father had divided up investments, land parcels, vehicles, even the damn tractor. Everyone got something. Brian got almost everything. The house, the company, the safe deposit box. Even my dad's coin collection, the one we both used to help him organize when we were little, went to Brian. But me? Nothing. Not a dollar. Not a mention. Not a line. I thought maybe it was a mistake, a clerical error, a second envelope with my name that got lost. But when Weller closed the folder and thanked everyone for coming, I just sat there, stunned. I finally asked, Mr. Weller, was there a second will? Or an amendment? I didn't see my name mentioned. He frowned, looked at me like he was seeing a ghost. Then he said the words that broke the air like glass. Matthew, your father believed you died 10 years ago. I laughed. I couldn't help it. One sharp, ridiculous bark of a laugh. I'm sorry. What? Weller was already pulling out a sheet of paper from the back of the folder. Your brother, Brian, provided a death certificate. A copy. He said it was a car accident. Out west. I could feel every pair of eyes in the room drilling into me. I turned toward Brian. He didn't blink. Are you kidding me? I said. You told Dad I was dead? Brian shrugged. I told him what he needed to hear. That was when I realized two things. My brother had erased me from our father's life. He'd done it deliberately. And now I was going to find out why. The room cleared quickly after that. Some offered me awkward condolences, like I was grieving twice, once for my dad, and again for the life I didn't know was being stolen from me. Others just kept their heads down and left in silence. Brian didn't budge. He stayed seated like a king on a crumbling throne, legs crossed, fingers tapping his wristwatch. I stood across from him, pulse in my ears. So that's it? You just told him I was dead. He didn't flinch. You left, Matt. I filled in the blanks. You forged my death certificate. I did what needed to be done. You were already gone. Weller cleared his throat, clearly rattled. Mr. Walker. I had no reason to doubt. Your brother presented documentation. Your father mourned you. Mourned what? I barked. A ghost story? Brian stood and adjusted his collar. Dad was sick. He didn't need your baggage. I almost lunged at him. But I didn't. That would have made his story look more believable. Weller handed me a folder. This is what was submitted. If it's false, I suggest you take it to the proper authorities. Inside was a photocopy of an Oregon State death certificate. My name, Matthew Allen Walker. Cause of death, blunt force trauma from a vehicular collision. Date, August 11th. My birthday. Of course it was. They didn't even try to be subtle. You expect me to believe this? I said, holding it up. I've never even been hospitalized. Brian shrugged. Not my problem anymore. Not yet. He walked out with that same arrogant swagger that used to get him out of trouble in high school. But this time, he was going to learn what it felt like when trouble followed you home. I spent the next 2 days digging into every legal database and public record I could access. I wasn't a practicing lawyer anymore, not since I quit big law and started teaching, but I still had contacts. Still had access. First stop, the Oregon Department of Vital Records. The death certificate number? Didn't exist in their system. Then the formatting errors jumped out at me. Wrong watermark, outdated logo, a registrar's name who hadn't worked there since 2006. It wasn't just fake, it was lazy. I called Vanessa, an old friend who worked at the DMV. Can you check if my identity's been flagged or cross-referenced? Give me a sec, she said, typing. Huh, that's weird. You renewed your license last year, but there was also a query on your file 2 months after the fake death date. From a private insurer. That's when the dread kicked in. I pulled my own credit report. And that's where everything fell apart. There were inquiries from lenders I'd never contacted. 2 credit cards I never applied for. A property management company listed me as a former tenant at an address I'd never lived at. And buried in the insurance section, a life insurance policy. Opened under my name. Value, $50,000. Beneficiary? Brian. And worse, it had already been paid out. 10 years ago. The same week I died. I just stared at the screen. My stomach twisted. This wasn't just a sibling rivalry. It was identity theft. Fraud. A carefully constructed lie with financial benefits. He didn't just lie to Dad. He buried me for profit. And I had the proof to dig it all up. The policy had been small, $50,000, but it wasn't the amount that mattered. It was the proof. Someone impersonated me to file the claim, and they had to provide documentation to do it. I called the insurance company, sat on hold for 27 agonizing minutes before a woman named Ellen picked up. Hi, yes. I need to verify a life insurance payout from 2013. Policy number. I rattled it off. I believe I'm the insured party. There was a long pause. Sir, I'm seeing here that this claim was processed over 10 years ago. Beneficiary Brian Walker. Is he a relative? Unfortunately. May I ask why you're requesting this information? Because I'm not dead. Another pause. I could practically hear her eyes widening. I'll need to transfer you to our fraud division. Please do. The next voice was colder, clipped. A man named Richard took over, and I explained the situation. That I was alive. That I had evidence the certificate was fake. That someone impersonated me to access insurance funds. We're going to need a signed affidavit, he said. And photo identification. We'll open an investigation immediately. If fraud occurred, the payout is void. And Mr. Walker may be liable for restitution and criminal charges. Good, I said. Because I'm just getting started. Next call? Vanessa again. I need help pulling every piece of data tied to my SSN in the last 10 years. Credit applications, property leases, employment records, everything. Damn, she muttered. What did your brother do? Try to become you? Something like that. She promised to get back to me within 48 hours. In the meantime, I started documenting. I built out a case file like it was a trial, printed every record, highlighted timelines, logged my own travel history and employment records to prove I couldn't have been where some of these applications claimed I was. There was a mortgage in Idaho, a used car loan in Arizona, even a gym membership in Boise. I haven't set foot in Idaho since a camping trip in college. He'd been living a double life, not impersonating me every day, but using my name, credit, and clean record whenever it benefited him. And no one ever questioned it. Because he looked like me. Because we shared a last name. Because I was dead. I visited the lawyer, Weller, again. You said the estate's already transferring assets? He nodded. Brian filed the paperwork the day after the funeral. I want to contest it. Officially. He stiffened. That'll be difficult. Your father's intent was based on a lie, I cut in. He excluded me because he thought I was dead. I'm very much not. That makes the will invalid, or at the very least, challengeable. You'll need to file suit. Already working on it. I handed him copies of the credit report, the fake death certificate, and a notarized statement of identity. Weller skimmed it, then leaned back slowly. I never liked your brother. Get in line. That night, I got a call from a number I didn't recognize. I picked up on the second ring. You really want to do this? Brian's voice. Calm. Tense underneath. Already did. There was a long silence. Then, you were gone. You didn't care about him. About us. You faked my death, stole my identity, and took money meant for a corpse. Dad didn't want to hear from you. No, you didn't. Another silence. Then he said something I'll never forget. You think you're going to win because you're a lawyer? Because you have paper trails? I think I'm going to win, I said, because the truth is harder to bury than you thought. Then I hung up. I stared at the phone for a long time, adrenaline still pumping. For 10 years, he lived like I didn't exist. Now he was going to wish I really was gone. Vanessa came through faster than I expected. I was sitting on my apartment floor, sorting files into piles, real, fake, disputed, when her name popped up on my phone. I answered before it finished ringing. Okay, she said, I have everything. And you're going to want to sit down. Already am. She sent over a zip file. I opened it. What I saw made my blood run cold. Vanessa, there's over 70 records in here. 74, she corrected. Brian used your identity in at least 6 states. He applied for loans, opened utilities, even filed taxes under your name once. Twice if you count the one with the Idaho address. My jaw clenched. That's a federal crime. Yeah, she said. You should probably talk to someone at the IRS before they audit you for fraud you didn't commit. There were documents I didn't recognize, leases, memberships, background check forms, but all with my name and SSN. In one case, he'd applied for a teaching grant under my credentials and got it. I wasn't just erased. I was impersonated. Professionally. Financially. Legally. Vanessa flagged 3 specific entries for me to focus on. First, a rental property in Boise used as a short-term vacation spot. Lease opened under my name, paid with prepaid cards, no forwarding address. Local police had listed the address as a frequent noise complaint source in 2017. Second, a car lease in New Mexico with my fake signature and an Arizona phone number. The vehicle had been abandoned near the border and auctioned off. Third, an LLC filing in Wyoming. A shell company, never taxed. Registered under Matthew A. Walker. Guess who the listed agent was? Brian. The scam had layers. The death certificate was just the first one. And if I'd never come back, if I'd stayed dead, he would have kept going, leveraging my clean record to front every lie he couldn't support with his own name. That night, I contacted the FBI's Identity Theft Division. A guy named Agent Riley called me back within 24 hours. This is extensive, he said after reviewing my files. And pretty brazen. Most identity thieves don't share Thanksgiving dinner with their victims. Yeah, I said. He also gave the eulogy. The agent let that sit a second. We'll escalate. But I want to be clear, this isn't just about money anymore. If any of these identities were used to commit additional fraud, you could be tangled in things beyond inheritance law. I knew what he meant. Brian hadn't just impersonated me for convenience. He was using me as a shield. That week, I also got a letter from the probate court. The will contest was accepted. A hearing was scheduled. Brian was being ordered to produce all documentation used to inform the estate distribution, including the death certificate. It was official. I was about to drag my own brother into court for faking my death, and I hadn't even filed criminal charges yet. Then the call came from Weller. You need to come to the office. Now. Why? He didn't answer right away. There's a safety deposit box. Your father opened it 20 years ago. Brian claimed it was empty, but we just had it opened with court approval. I drove straight there. Inside the box were 3 things. A copy of my birth certificate, a letter addressed to Matthew, in case you come back, and a thumb drive. Weller looked at me. You should read it alone. I took the letter and sat in the conference room. My hands were shaking. The handwriting was unmistakable, my father's. Matthew. I don't know if you'll ever read this. Your brother told me you were gone, but part of me never fully believed it. I don't know why you left or why you didn't come back. But if you ever do, and you're reading this, then know I never stopped hoping. And if you find this after I'm gone, it means you were right to come back. I sat there, the letter clutched in my hand. I stinging. He hadn't stopped believing. Not completely. He just didn't know who to trust. But I did. And now the truth was sitting in a deposit box. And soon, it would be in front of a judge. I waited until I got home to open the thumb drive. Part of me was afraid it would be empty or worse, filled with outdated tax files and grocery lists. But I plugged it into an old laptop I kept for sensitive stuff, took a deep breath, and waited for it to load. There were 5 folders. The first was labeled simply, Estate Backup. Inside were scans of the original will, the one from 12 years ago. My name was everywhere, listed alongside Brian as co-heir, set to inherit the house, a portion of the company, and something marked Vault Asset. I didn't even know we had a vault. The second folder, Insurance. Dozens of scanned documents, policies, receipts, even notes in my father's handwriting. I recognized his penmanship instantly, tight, angled. One note read, Brian said Matt declined beneficiary role. Odd. Follow up? He never did. The third folder, Matthew. It stopped me cold. Inside were screenshots of emails I'd sent over the years, updates from my university job, pictures of hikes, apartment photos, all messages I'd sent to an old account he never replied to. He'd saved them. Every single one. He didn't ignore me. Brian did. The fourth folder was a password-protected zip file. I didn't have the key yet. but I had contacts who could help me crack it. The last folder, audio logs. That one nearly knocked the wind out of me. There were 6 files, each labeled by date. The last one was recorded just 6 months before my father died. I hesitated, then hit play. His voice filled the room. I don't know if I'm being paranoid, but Brian's story doesn't sit right with me. I asked him for Matt's driver's license. He said he couldn't find it. I asked him for a copy of the death certificate. He gave me a scan, but I noticed the seal was wrong. I paused it. My whole body was shaking. He knew. He knew something was wrong, and he still didn't act. Maybe he was scared. Maybe he was sick. But part of him knew Brian was lying. And part of him still believed I might walk back through that door. I spent the rest of the night copying every file, backing up the drive to encrypted storage, and preparing 2 versions, one for the court, one for the FBI. The next morning, I walked into Weller's office with a folder so full it barely closed. "This is everything," I said. He didn't ask questions, just nodded and started scanning. Then my phone rang. Blocked number. I let it go to voicemail. 30 seconds later, a text buzzed through. From Brian. "Don't do this. We can talk. You're being emotional." I almost laughed. Then came the second text. "If you go public, I'll tell them everything. About college. About what you did senior year." There it was. The threat. But he had nothing. And I wasn't 22 anymore. That same day, the court filing went live. Contesting the will. Alleging fraud. Requesting a full freeze on estate distribution. It didn't take long for word to spread. Small-town Virginia loves a scandal, especially when it involves one of its founding families. By that evening, I was getting calls from numbers I hadn't saved in years. Is it true? Did Brian really do that? I always thought something seemed off. Apparently, I wasn't the only one who knew he wasn't the golden boy he pretended to be. Then the local paper called. A reporter named Andrea Monroe. Friendly voice, sharper mind. "We've heard chatter about a will dispute. Can you confirm?" I declined to comment. But 24 hours later, the story broke anyway. Local heir challenges father's will. Claims he was faked dead. Front page. They used my high school yearbook photo, the one where I looked sunburned and half asleep. Typical. Brian's photo was better. Always was. But the damage was done. And then came the letter from his lawyer. Cease and desist. Defamation. Baseless claims. I pinned it to my fridge like a trophy. Because now it was official. Brian had spent 10 years trying to bury me. And now the whole world was watching him dig. The courtroom was packed. Not with spectators. This wasn't some dramatic trial with jurors gasping, but with attorneys, clerks, and family members pretending not to watch. Brian sat across the aisle from me, jaw tight, tie crooked. His lawyer looked like she wanted to be anywhere else. I felt oddly calm, not because I wasn't angry, but because I had nothing left to prove. The judge was direct. This hearing is to assess the legitimacy of the will and determine whether sufficient fraud occurred to warrant overturning it. Weller began with the basics. My father's original will, the sudden change, and the fact that I'd been declared dead based on a forged document. He presented the death certificate, the evidence from the Oregon Records Office, the seal discrepancy, the registrar who hadn't worked there in years. Then he played the audio log. The courtroom was silent as my father's voice echoed off the walls. Brian gave me a copy, but something doesn't feel right. I asked him for more proof, and he got defensive. I want to believe him. I do. But part of me wonders if Matt's still out there. Brian stared at the table like it might open up and swallow him whole. Weller finished calmly. Your Honor, the will was altered under false pretenses. Not only was Mr. Walker alive, but his identity was used for a decade to commit fraud. We request a full reversal and a referral to law enforcement. Brian's lawyer stood, face pale. My client maintains he believed his brother was dead based on previous family history. There was estrangement, miscommunication, emotional instability. He never meant to deceive anyone. The judge raised an eyebrow. And the life insurance policy? Her voice cracked. My client was not aware the policy had been filed. He believed it was something their father set up before Matthew's departure. And the emails? The SSN traces? The audio of him threatening his brother? Silence. Then it was my turn. I stood up. My voice didn't shake. I didn't come back for revenge. I came back because I learned my father had passed, and I wanted to pay my respects. What I found was that I'd been legally erased, impersonated, and stolen from. This wasn't a misunderstanding. It was a long, deliberate act of deception. and I refused to let that stand. The judge asked a few questions. I answered clearly. I'd spent weeks preparing. I knew my case inside and out. When it was over, the judge took a recess. 15 minutes that felt like a century. Then he returned and read the ruling. The court finds sufficient evidence that the 2013 amendment to the will was executed based on fraudulent information. Therefore, the original will from 2011 is hereby reinstated. The estate is to be divided accordingly. Furthermore, this court will refer evidence of identity theft and insurance fraud to the district attorney's office for criminal investigation. It was done. Brian didn't look at me. He just sat there, motionless. I left the courtroom feeling hollow, not triumphant, not vindicated, just free. But it wasn't over. That night, I cracked the password on the final folder from the thumb drive. Inside, photos, dozens of them, receipts, correspondence, messages, all pointing to one final betrayal. Brian hadn't acted alone. My mother, estranged for years, had helped him. She signed documents, made calls, covered for him. The death certificate? She notarized it. The insurance policy? Her number was the one listed for verification. I sat back in my chair, heart pounding. I'd been so focused on Brian that I missed the quiet hand behind the curtain. My phone buzzed. A blocked number again. I answered this time. Her voice was thin, like it had traveled through a tunnel of guilt. "Matthew," she said, "please don't do this. It wasn't supposed to go that far. I didn't say anything. You were never supposed to come back." There it was. The truth, ugly and unfiltered. They didn't just forget me. They planned for me to stay gone. "I'm not pressing charges," I said. "Not yet. But I've sent the files to my attorney and to the FBI. What they do with them is out of my hands. I just wanted your brother to have a chance," she whispered. "At what cost?" The line went dead. 2 weeks later, Brian was arrested. Fraud, identity theft, wire fraud, insurance crimes. 3 separate states filed charges. I didn't attend the arraignment, didn't watch the news coverage, didn't return the calls from people who suddenly wanted to reconnect. I used my share of the estate to launch a legal aid fund, specifically for victims of identity fraud and financial abuse by family. Vanessa joined as a consultant. The program now has 12 clients. 12 people who, like me, were nearly erased by the people they trusted most. Sometimes they ask me why I didn't destroy Brian completely, why I let the system handle it. And I always say the same thing. Because I needed to know the truth was stronger than the lie. And now? Now it's written in court records. Now it's permanent. Brian buried me on paper. But I came back. And this time, I brought receipts.